You know, they say a mother's intuition is never wrong. Well, let me tell you something. Mine was screaming from the very first day I met her. Madison, that's her name. Beautiful on the outside, rotten to the core within. She waltzed into my son's life like she owned the place, and before I knew it, she had her claws so deep in him, I thought I'd lost my boy forever. My Michael, my successful, famous, wonderful son, reduced to a puppet dancing to her tune. But here's the thing about gold diggers. Honey, they always get too greedy, too comfortable, too careless. And when Madison finally showed her true colors when she thought she had won everything, well, let's just say the tables turned in ways she never saw coming. Because you see, while she was busy trying to destroy me, I was busy protecting everything we built. And by the time she realized what had really happened, it was already too late. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of how this story unfolds. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I've lived what some might call a charmed life. My late husband Robert and I built something beautiful together. A media empire that started with one small radio station and grew into a network that spans across 3 states. When Robert passed away 15 years ago, he left everything to me and our son Michael. But Michael, oh my Michael, he took that foundation and turned it into something even Robert couldn't have imagined. By the time Michael turned 32, he wasn't just running the family business, he was a household name. You couldn't turn on the television without seeing his face on some talk show, discussing media trends, or announcing another acquisition. Forbes called him the media maverick of the new generation. People magazine put him on their most eligible bachelor list 3 years running. We had everything: the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the house in the Hamptons, the ranch in Colorado. Life was beautiful, and I was so proud of the man my son had become. That's when she appeared. I remember the exact moment Michael brought Madison home for the first time. It was a crisp October evening in 2019, and I was in my garden, tending to my roses, the same roses Robert had planted for me 25 years earlier. Michael walked through the back gate with this stunning blonde on his arm. She was tall, elegant, with perfect teeth and designer everything. Even her laugh seemed calculated to hit just the right frequency. "Mom, I'd like you to meet Madison Clark," Michael said, his face glowing with that look men get when they think they've found their dream woman. Madison extended a perfectly manicured hand, and when I shook it, it was cold as ice. "Mrs. Hayes, I've heard so much about you. Michael talks about you constantly." Right there, in that moment, every alarm bell in my head started ringing. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Like she was reading from a script. Like she practiced this moment in front of a mirror. But Michael was beaming, absolutely radiant, and I wasn't about to rain on his parade. Not yet. Over the next few months, I watched Madison work her magic on my son. She was good, I'll give her that. Really good. She'd show up at family dinners with homemade desserts, though I noticed the bakery boxes in her car. She'd ask me for advice about everything from career choices to interior decorating, making me feel like she valued my opinion. She even started calling me Mom Eleanor, which should have been sweet but somehow made my skin crawl. But it was the little things that gave her away. The way her eyes would scan the room during dinner, cataloging everything valuable. How she'd steer conversations toward Michael's latest business deals or acquisitions. The way she'd take photos of our home. For inspiration, she'd say. But I noticed she never actually posted them on social media. She was documenting, not sharing. 6 months into their relationship, Michael started talking about marriage. 6 months. My son, who had never been in a relationship longer than a year, was suddenly ready to walk down the aisle with a woman who made my teeth ache every time she smiled. I tried talking to him, gently at first. "Michael, honey, don't you think you should take more time to really get to know each other?" "Mom, when you know," he'd say, with that dreamy look in his eyes. Madison gets me. She understands the pressure of being in the public eye. She's supportive of everything I'm trying to build. Of course she was supportive. She was getting a front row seat to the fortune she was about to inherit. The engagement happened on New Year's Eve, right there in our penthouse, with half of New York's elite watching. Michael got down on one knee with a ring that cost more than most people's houses, and Madison played her part perfectly. Tears, gasps, the whole production. The crowd cheered, champagne flowed, and I smiled and clapped while my heart sank into my stomach. The wedding planning was a nightmare disguised as a dream come true. Madison wanted everything to be perfect, which apparently meant expensive beyond belief. The venue alone cost more than my first house. She hired 3 different wedding planners before finding one who could truly capture her vision. Every decision had to be approved by her, even things that traditionally the groom's family would handle. But it was during the planning process that I started seeing the real Madison. The mask began to slip just around the edges. I remember one particular afternoon when we were meeting with the florist. Madison had been going on for 20 minutes about how the centerpieces needed to be absolutely stunning because people will be photographing everything. The florist, a sweet woman named Rose who'd been doing weddings for 30 years, suggested using some seasonal flowers to add warmth and reduce costs. Madison's face changed completely. The sweet smile vanished, and her voice turned sharp as a blade. "I don't think you understand what kind of wedding this is. This isn't some backyard barbecue. These arrangements will be seen by very important people, and I will not have them talking about cheap flowers." Poor Rose looked like she'd been slapped. "Of course, Miss Clark. I just thought." "Don't think," Madison cut her off. "Just do what you're told." I intervened, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was done. "And Madison?" She turned to me with that practiced smile back in place like nothing had happened. "Sorry about that, Mom Eleanor. I just want everything to be perfect for Michael." But I saw it. I saw the real person underneath, and she was cold and cruel. The incidents started piling up. Madison reduced the caterer to tears because the sample appetizers weren't sophisticated enough. She fired the string quartet 3 days before the wedding because she decided classical music wasn't on brand for Michael's image. She even tried to uninvite some of Michael's oldest friends because they weren't influential enough for her guest list. Each time, Michael would defend her. "She's just stressed, Mom. Planning a wedding is overwhelming." Or, "Madison has high standards because she knows how important this is for both of us." I started documenting everything. Call it a mother's intuition or a businesswoman's instinct. But something told me I was going to need evidence of who Madison really was. I kept notes, saved text messages, even recorded a few conversations when things got particularly ugly. The wedding itself was everything Madison had demanded: opulent, perfect, and completely soulless. As I watched my son marry this woman, I felt like I was witnessing a business transaction rather than a celebration of love. Madison's vows were beautiful, poetic even, but they felt rehearsed. Like everything else about her, they were a performance. The honeymoon period lasted exactly 3 months. Madison moved into the penthouse with Michael, and suddenly, everything started changing. She began redecorating immediately, claiming she wanted to make the space more reflective of their life together. Out went the family photos Robert and I had collected over decades. Away went the comfortable furniture Michael had grown up with. Everything was replaced with cold, modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a home. But the real changes were more subtle. Madison started inserting herself into Michael's business meetings, claiming she could offer a fresh perspective. She began showing up at company events, networking with Michael's clients and partners like she was an equal partner rather than a spouse. She even suggested changes to the company's marketing strategy, despite having no experience in media or business. And slowly, deliberately, she began cutting me out. It started with little things. Family dinners became less frequent because Madison and Michael were so busy with their new life together. When we did get together, Madison would dominate the conversation, steering it away from anything that might remind Michael of his life before her. She'd interrupt me mid-sentence, dismiss my opinions, and generally treat me like I was an inconvenience. The worst part was watching Michael change. My confident, successful son began second-guessing himself. He'd look to Madison for approval before making decisions that he'd been making independently for years. She had him convinced that his previous way of doing things was outdated, that he needed to evolve to stay relevant. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, I decided to have a heart-to-heart with my son. I asked him to come over for dinner, just the two of us, like we used to do when he was younger. Michael, I said as we sat in my private dining room, are you happy? He looked surprised by the question. Of course I'm happy, Mom. Why would you ask that? You just seem different lately. More stressed. Like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe I was getting through to him. Then he sighed and said, Madison thinks I rely on you too much. She says it's not healthy for a married man to be so dependent on his mother for emotional support. My heart broke a little more. Michael, wanting to maintain a close relationship with your mother isn't dependence. It's family. I know, Mom, but Madison has a point. I need to establish my own family now, create new traditions with my wife. Madison thinks we should spend more time building our relationship and less time looking backward. There it was. Madison was systematically isolating him from everyone who truly cared about him, starting with me. Over the next few months, the attacks on me became more direct and more cruel. Madison would make little comments about how I was getting older, and maybe it was time for me to step back from being so involved in Michael's life. She'd suggest that I was holding him back, that my old-fashioned ideas were hurting his image. But the real dagger came during a company board meeting in March of 2021. Michael had asked me to attend, as I still held a significant stake in the company. Madison showed up uninvited, claiming she was there to support her husband. During the meeting, when I offered some input about a potential acquisition, Madison actually laughed out loud. I'm sorry, she said, not looking sorry at all, but maybe we should focus on more current perspectives. Some of these ideas sound like they're from the 1990s. The room went dead silent. Board members who had known me for decades looked uncomfortable and embarrassed for her. Michael should have said something, should have defended me. Instead, he just looked down at his hands and said nothing. After the meeting, I pulled Madison aside. Don't you ever disrespect me like that again, I told her quietly. I was building this company when you were still in diapers. She smiled that cold, calculated smile. Eleanor, I think you're confused about your role here. You're Michael's mother, not his business partner. And frankly, your constant interference is becoming a problem. Michael needs to make his own decisions without his mommy holding his hand. That night, I cried for the first time since Robert's funeral. Not because of what Madison had said to me. I'd dealt with worse in my years in business. I cried because my son had let her say it. But Madison wasn't done. Not even close. The next phase of her plan was even more insidious. She began spreading subtle rumors about my mental state, suggesting that I was becoming forgetful, maybe even showing early signs of dementia. She'd bring up conversations we'd supposedly had that never happened, or claim I'd promised to do things I'd never agreed to. When I'd correct her, she'd look at Michael with concern and say something like, maybe she just doesn't remember. She also started making herself indispensable to Michael's business. Somehow, she wormed her way into becoming his unofficial publicist and social media manager. She controlled his image, his schedule, even who he could and couldn't meet with. And she was good at it. His public profile grew even larger under her management. But it also made him more dependent on her. The isolation campaign intensified. Madison would schedule trips and events during times she knew were important to me. My birthday, the anniversary of Robert's death, holidays we'd always spent together. When I'd mentioned feeling hurt, she'd apologize sweetly and claim it was just an oversight, but it kept happening. She also began questioning my financial decisions. Madison would make comments about how I was spending too freely, or suggest that I wasn't being strategic with my investments. She'd hint that maybe it would be better if someone younger, someone more in touch with current markets, helped me manage my portfolio. The breaking point came in September of 2021, almost exactly 2 years after I'd first met Madison. Michael called me and asked if we could have lunch. I was thrilled. We hadn't spent time alone together in months. But when I arrived at the restaurant, Madison was there too. I hope you don't mind that I joined you, she said with that fake smile. Michael and I have something important to discuss with you. My stomach dropped. I knew whatever was coming wouldn't be good. Michael looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mom. Madison and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider retirement. Retirement? I kept my voice steady, but inside I was reeling. Madison leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Eleanor, you've worked so hard for so many years. Don't you think you deserve to relax, enjoy your golden years? Travel, take up hobbies, spend time with friends? I am spending time with friends, I said. I work with people I've known for decades. The company isn't just my job, it's my life's work. But that's exactly the problem, Madison continued. You've given so much of yourself to the business that you haven't had time to develop a life outside of it. And frankly, some of the board members have expressed concerns about whether you're still equipped to handle the demands of modern business. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she was out of line. Instead, he just nodded slowly. Maybe Madison has a point, Mom. Maybe it would be good for you to step back, focus on yourself for a while. That's when I realized just how completely she had him under her spell. My son, who owed everything he had to the foundation his father and I had built, was asking me to walk away from it all. But I didn't get angry. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I smiled and said, you know what? You might be right. Let me think about it. The relief on Madison's face was unmistakable. She thought she'd won. That night, I called my lawyer, James Morrison, who had been handling my legal affairs for over 20 years. James, I said, I need to make some changes to my will and my asset allocation, and I need you to do it quietly. Of course, Eleanor. What did you have in mind? I want to transfer ownership of everything, the company shares, the properties, all of it, into a trust with very specific conditions. Over the next 2 weeks, James and I worked out the details. Everything I owned would go into an irrevocable trust with Michael as the primary beneficiary, but with conditions that would protect the assets from being taken by anyone else, including a spouse in the event of a divorce. The trust was structured so that Michael would have access to the income and could make certain business decisions, but he couldn't sell or transfer the assets without meeting very specific criteria. Most importantly, if Michael predeceased me or if he ever tried to challenge the trust, everything would go to charity instead. It was a complex legal structure, but it would protect both Michael and our family legacy from gold diggers like Madison. I also made another decision. I started recording conversations, not just with Madison, but with Michael too. I wanted documentation of what was happening, proof of how she was manipulating both of us. The legal transfer was completed in early October 2021. On paper, Michael now owned everything, but in reality, it was all protected by the trust structure. Madison had no idea what had really happened. She just saw that everything had been transferred to her husband's name. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. I announced my retirement from the company in November with a big party and lots of fanfare. Madison played the role of the loving daughter-in-law perfectly, giving a speech about how grateful she was for everything I'd taught her and how much she looked forward to spending more time with me now that I'd have more free time. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, the real Madison returned. Well, she said to me as we stood in the kitchen cleaning up after the party, that wasn't so hard, was it? Now maybe Michael can finally run his own company without his mother micromanaging everything. I'm sure he'll do wonderfully, I replied calmly. Oh, he will. Especially now that he won't have you questioning his every decision or making him feel guilty for living his own life. I just smiled and continued washing dishes. But Madison wasn't satisfied with just getting me out of the business. She wanted me gone entirely. Over the next few months, the campaign to push me out of Michael's life intensified. Madison would schedule important events during times when Michael and I had plans, forcing him to choose between his wife and his mother. She'd forget to invite me to gatherings with their friends. She even suggested that maybe I should consider moving to Florida or Arizona, somewhere more suitable for someone my age. The cruelest incident happened during Christmas of 2021. Michael and Madison were hosting Christmas dinner for the first time, and I was so excited to continue our family traditions in their new space. I spent weeks preparing, making all of Michael's favorite dishes from when he was a child. When I arrived at their penthouse, arms full of food and presents, Madison met me at the door. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, not making any move to help me with what I was carrying. "I'm so sorry, but we had to make some changes to the menu. I hired a caterer because I wanted everything to be perfect. All of my food, all of those hours of preparation, were dismissed with a wave of her hand. But it got worse. During dinner, Madison dominated the conversation, talking about their recent trip to Europe and their plans for the future. Every time I tried to contribute to the conversation, she'd either interrupt me or change the subject. When I mentioned a memory of Christmas when Michael was little, she said, "Oh, we're making new traditions now. It's important to focus on the present, not live in the past." The final humiliation came when it was time for presents. I had gotten Michael a watch, the same brand his father had worn, engraved with a message about carrying on the family legacy. When he opened it, his eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw my real son again. But Madison quickly intervened. "Oh, that's lovely," she said in a tone that clearly indicated it wasn't, "but Michael already has so many watches. Maybe we should return it and get something more practical." Michael, who had been admiring the watch, suddenly looked uncertain. "Maybe Madison's right, Mom. I do have a lot of watches already." That night, as I sat alone in my penthouse looking at the city lights, I realized that Madison wasn't just trying to push me out of Michael's life. She was trying to erase me entirely. Every family tradition, every shared memory, every connection between my son and me was being systematically destroyed. But what Madison didn't know was that I had been raised by parents who survived the Great Depression. They taught me that you never put all your eggs in one basket, and you never let anyone know exactly how much you have or where you keep it. While she was busy trying to destroy my relationship with Michael, I was quietly documenting everything. I had recordings of her cruel comments, photographs of the way she treated staff and vendors, testimony from people who had witnessed her behavior. I was building a case not for court, but for the moment when Michael would finally see her for who she really was. Because I knew that moment would come. Gold diggers always get greedy, and when they do, they make mistakes. Madison's first big mistake came in March of 2022. She had been managing Michael's social media accounts and had built up a significant following for herself as the wife of media mogul Michael Hayes. She started getting offers for sponsorships and partnerships, and I could see the dollar signs in her eyes. But she got careless. She posted a photo of herself wearing jewelry that I knew Michael couldn't afford on his current salary, not unless he was dipping into company funds or selling assets. When I quietly asked my accountant to look into it, we discovered that Madison had been encouraging Michael to take out significant loans against his future inheritance. The problem was, thanks to the trust structure, there was no guarantee of that inheritance. If something happened to Michael, or if certain conditions weren't met, those loans would be his personal responsibility. I could have confronted them immediately, but I decided to wait. Let Madison dig the hole deeper. And she did. By summer of 2022, Madison had convinced Michael to co-sign for a loan so she could start her own lifestyle brand. She wanted to launch a line of luxury goods and position herself as an influencer in the high society space. The initial investment was substantial, nearly $2 million. I watched from the sidelines as Madison spent money like water. She hired expensive consultants, rented luxurious office space, and threw lavish launch parties. The lifestyle brand was more about Madison's lifestyle than any actual products. But the business was failing. Madison had no real business experience, and her products were overpriced copies of things that were already available elsewhere. The company was hemorrhaging money, and Madison's response was to spend more money on marketing and PR, convinced that she just needed better visibility. By December of 2022, the loans were coming due, and the business was nowhere close to profitability. Madison began pressuring Michael to sell some assets to cover the debt. That's when she made her biggest mistake. "Why don't you sell that old ranch in Colorado?" she suggested during a family dinner. "Nobody goes there anymore, and it's just sitting there losing money." The ranch in Colorado wasn't just any property. It was where Robert had proposed to me, where Michael had learned to ride horses, where we'd spent every summer as a family. It was more than real estate. It was our family's heart. But more importantly, Madison had no way of knowing that the ranch couldn't be sold. It was protected by the trust, along with all the other family assets. That's not a bad idea, Michael said, and I could see he was seriously considering it. We could probably get a good price for it. I think that would be a mistake, I said calmly. Madison's eyes flashed with anger. Eleanor, with all due respect, this isn't really your decision anymore. Michael owns all the properties now. Actually, I said, setting down my wine glass, he doesn't. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked confused. What do you mean, Mom? I mean that when I transferred everything to your name, I did it through a trust structure. You have control over the assets and access to the income, but you can't sell them without meeting certain conditions. Madison's face went white. What conditions? I smiled. Oh, various things. Maintaining the family legacy, protecting the assets from frivolous spending, ensuring that everything stays within the family bloodline. The conversation that followed was ugly. Madison accused me of tricking them, of being manipulative and controlling. She demanded to see the legal documents, threatened to challenge the trust in court. But the beautiful thing about a well-structured trust is that it's almost impossible to break, especially when it's been set up to protect legitimate family interests. Michael was caught in the middle, torn between his wife's fury and his growing realization that I had been protecting him all along. Mom, he said quietly, why didn't you tell me about the trust conditions? Because I hoped I wouldn't need to, I replied honestly. I hoped that the woman you married would respect our family and our legacy. I hoped she would want to preserve what your father and I built, not liquidate it to fund her vanity projects. Madison exploded. Vanity projects? I'm trying to build something of my own. Create my own success. With other people's money, I pointed out. With loans secured against assets you assumed you could sell. Tell me, Madison, what happens when those loans come due and you can't pay them? The question hung in the air like a sword. Because we all knew the answer. Michael would be personally liable for millions of dollars in debt. That's when the real Madison finally showed herself completely. You bitter old woman, she hissed. You can't stand that Michael chose me over you. You can't stand that he has a wife who actually supports his ambitions instead of trying to control every aspect of his life. Is that what you think you've been doing? I asked. Supporting him? By isolating him from his friends and family? By spending his money on failed business ventures? By treating his mother like garbage? I've been protecting him from you. Madison shouted. From your manipulation and your need to control everything. Michael was never going to be his own man as long as you were pulling the strings. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Would you like to hear what protecting him sounds like? I played one of the recordings I'd made. Madison's voice crystal clear as she berated the wedding florist, calling her pathetic and incompetent. Then another one, where she was talking to her friend about how she was going to get that old bat out of the picture permanently. Michael's face went pale as he listened to the woman he'd married reveal her true nature. But I wasn't done. I had months of documentation, photos, recordings, witness statements from employees and vendors who had been mistreated by Madison. I showed them all to Michael, laying out the pattern of behavior that had been hidden from him. The final piece of evidence was a conversation Madison had had with her sister, which I'd recorded when she called while visiting my house. In it, Madison talked about her plans for after I died, how she was going to sell everything, liquidate the business, and move to Europe with the money. She won't live forever, Madison had said, and when she's gone, all of this will belong to Michael. We'll finally be free to do whatever we want with it. Michael sat in stunned silence as the recording played. When it finished, he looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Madison, he said slowly, is this true? Have you been planning to sell everything? Madison tried to backtrack, to claim I had taken everything out of context, but the damage was done. Michael had heard her own words, seen her own behavior documented in painful detail. The divorce proceedings started 3 months later. Madison fought it, of course. She claimed she was entitled to half of everything as Michael's wife. But the trust structure protected the assets and the prenuptial agreement she had been so eager to sign. Thinking she was agreeing to share in wealth she assumed would be hers, actually limited her to a relatively modest settlement. More importantly, Michael was finally seeing clearly. The spell Madison had cast over him was broken, and he was remembering who he used to be before she entered his life. But the damage had been done. Michael had borrowed heavily against his future, and those loans were still his responsibility. The failed lifestyle brand had cost him nearly $3 million, and Madison's legal fees were adding up quickly. That's when I played my final card. I called Michael to my house and sat him down in the same room where his father and I used to make all our important family decisions. "Michael," I said, "I want you to know that I forgive you." He broke down crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what she was doing. You loved someone who didn't deserve it," I said gently. "That's not a character flaw. That's having a good heart. But now we need to fix the mess that's been made." I explained to him that while the trust protected our core assets, I still had access to significant personal funds that could be used to pay off his debts and cover the costs of the divorce. But I had conditions. "I want you to come back to the company," I said. "Not as my employee, but as my partner. I want us to rebuild what Madison tried to destroy." "What about the trust?" he asked. I smiled. "The trust has a provision that allows me to transfer full control to you if certain conditions are met. Ending your marriage to Madison was one of them. Recommitting to the family business was another. If you want to own everything outright, with no restrictions, all you have to do is prove that you're ready for that responsibility." Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't deserve it, Mom. After everything I put you through, after choosing her over you so many times." "Michael," I interrupted, "love isn't about keeping score. It's about forgiveness and second chances. Your father made mistakes too, and I made mistakes. That's what families do. We mess up, we hurt each other, and then we find our way back to each other." The process of rebuilding took time. Michael had to work through his guilt and anger at being so thoroughly deceived. I had to work through my own hurt at being pushed aside for 2 years. But slowly, we found our way back to each other. Madison, meanwhile, was discovering what life was like without access to other people's money. The settlement she received was comfortable but not luxurious, and she was horrified to learn that she would actually have to work for a living. Last I heard, she had moved to Los Angeles and was trying to rebuild her lifestyle brand on a much smaller scale. The business thrived with Michael and me working together again. We launched new ventures, acquired several smaller companies, and expanded into digital media in ways that kept us ahead of the competition. Michael's experience during his marriage, as painful as it was, had taught him valuable lessons about trust and loyalty that made him a better leader. But the most important thing we rebuilt was our relationship. We started having our weekly dinners again. We took trips together, visited the ranch in Colorado, and created new memories while honoring the old ones. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I called James Morrison and had him draw up the paperwork to transfer full ownership of everything to Michael. No trust restrictions, no conditions, no safety nets. I wanted him to know that I trusted him completely. When I gave him the papers, Michael was speechless. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told him. "You're the man I raised you to be, and you're the man your father would be proud of. This is your inheritance, and you've earned it." We were in his office when I gave him those papers, looking out at the city where his father and I had started our small radio station so many years ago. Michael was reading through the legal documents when he suddenly stopped and looked up at me. "Mom," he said, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He smiled. A real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since before Madison entered our lives. "I met someone. Her name is Sarah, and she's wonderful. She's a teacher, she loves kids, and she actually likes spending time with you." "How long have you been seeing her?" I asked. 3 months, he admitted. "I didn't want to introduce her to you until I was sure about my feelings, and until I was sure she was nothing like Madison. And, Mom, she baked you cookies last week and made me promise to bring them to you. She's been asking when she can meet you properly, and she keeps suggesting we all have dinner together. She actually wants to be part of our family, not replace it." I started crying, happy tears this time. I'd love to meet her. 2 weeks later, Michael brought Sarah to the house for dinner. She was everything he'd said and more, warm, genuine, funny, and clearly crazy about my son. But more than that, she treated me with respect and genuine affection. She asked about family traditions, wanted to see photo albums, and even asked if I would teach her some of Michael's favorite recipes. During dessert, Sarah looked around our dining room with its family photos and heirloom china and said, "I hope someday Michael and I can create something this beautiful for our own children." "This will always be here for them," I assured her. Family isn't about replacing what came before. It's about adding to it, building on the foundation that's already here. Madison had tried to erase our family's history. Sarah wanted to become part of it. 6 months later, Michael proposed to Sarah in the garden behind my house, next to the roses that Robert had planted for me all those years ago. She said yes, of course. And when she hugged me afterward, she whispered, "Thank you for raising such an incredible man." The wedding was everything Madison's had claimed to be, but wasn't, a true celebration of love and family. Sarah insisted on incorporating family traditions, used flowers from my garden in her bouquet, and asked me to walk her down the aisle alongside her father, because she wanted both families to be represented. During her vows, Sarah looked directly at me and said, "I promise to honor the family that made Michael who he is, and to build on the foundation of love that Eleanor and Robert created." There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Now, as I sit here today, 3 years after Sarah became my daughter-in-law, I can honestly say that Madison did me a favor. She showed me how precious family really is, how important it is to protect the people we love, and how strong the bonds can be when they're tested by fire. Michael and Sarah have given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, and our family is growing in ways that fill my heart with joy. The business continues to thrive, and we're already talking about what legacy we want to leave for the next generation. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Madison and wonder if she ever realized what she threw away. She had the chance to be part of something beautiful, something lasting, something real. Instead, she chose greed over love, manipulation over genuine connection. But you know what? I'm grateful for the experience now. Not grateful for the pain it caused, but grateful for the lessons it taught us. It showed Michael the difference between someone who loves you for who you are and someone who loves you for what you can give them. It taught me that protecting your family sometimes means making difficult decisions and taking unpopular stands. And it proved that real love, the love between a mother and son, the love that's built over decades of shared experiences and genuine care, is stronger than any manipulation or deception. The trust fund I created wasn't just about protecting money and assets. It was about protecting our family's values, our history, our future. Madison saw dollar signs where she should have seen legacy. She saw obstacles where she should have seen opportunities to build something together. I remember the last conversation I had with Madison, right before the divorce was finalized. She called me, furious about the settlement, demanding to know why I had ruined her life. "Eleanor," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "you could have had a daughter-in-law who would have taken care of you in your old age, who would have been there for you. Instead, you chose to be vindictive and petty." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Madison, taking care of me in my old age. You spent 2 years trying to convince my son to put me in a nursing home. You wanted me out of the picture entirely. I wanted what was best for Michael." "No," I said firmly, "you wanted what was best for Madison. And that's the difference between you and Sarah. Sarah wants to be part of our family. You wanted to replace it with something that served your purposes better. You'll regret this," she threatened. "When you're old and alone, when Michael gets tired of taking care of you, you'll wish you had someone like me around." "Madison," I said, feeling genuinely sorry for her, "I hope someday you learn the difference between being cared for, because people love you, and being tolerated because you're useful. I hope you find someone who sees your worth beyond what you can do for them. But that person was never going to be my son, and this family was never going to be the vehicle for your ambitions." I hung up after that, and I never heard from her again. The funny thing is, Madison was right about one thing. I am getting older. I'm 72 now, and there are days when I feel every one of those years. But I'm not alone, and I'm certainly not forgotten. Michael calls me every day, sometimes just to chat about nothing important. Sarah brings the grandchildren over twice a week, and they've claimed my guest bedroom as their special playroom. The house that Madison once described as a museum is now filled with the laughter of children again. Last month, my 4-year-old granddaughter Emma asked me to tell her the story of how Grandpa Michael and Grandma Sarah met. As I was telling her about their courtship, she interrupted me with a very serious expression. "Grandma Ellie," she said, "what happened to Grandpa Michael's first wife? The mean one." I was surprised. We'd never talked about Madison in front of the children. "How do you know about her, sweetheart?" "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking. Mommy said she was very mean to you." I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that sometimes people come into our lives who don't have good intentions? "Well," I said carefully, "sometimes people come into our families who don't really understand what family means. They think it's about getting things instead of giving love. Your Grandpa Michael learned that real love means wanting to make the people you care about happy, not trying to take things away from them." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like how Mommy always makes sure you have your favorite cookies when we visit?" "Exactly like that," I said, hugging her close. Children understand things so simply, so clearly. Love is wanting to make people happy. Everything else is just complications that adults create. Speaking of complications, you might wonder what happened to Madison's lifestyle brand. Well, it turns out that without access to unlimited funding and Michael's business connections, her venture collapsed within 6 months of the divorce. She tried to reinvent herself as a social media influencer, trading on her brief time as the wife of a media mogul, but that faded quickly too. The last I heard, she was working as a real estate agent in Beverly Hills, which is actually honest work and probably better suited to her talents for manipulation and presentation. I genuinely hope she's found some measure of happiness and learned something from our experience together. But I don't spend much time thinking about Madison anymore. My focus is on the future, on the family we've built, and the legacy we're creating for the next generation. Michael has grown into the kind of leader his father would be proud of. He's expanded our media empire into new territories, but he's done it while maintaining the values that Robert and I tried to instill in him. He treats his employees with respect. He gives back to the community, and he never forgets where he came from. Sarah has become the daughter I never had. She's brought her own traditions into our family while embracing ours. She's taught me about her Jewish heritage, her grandmother's recipes, holiday celebrations I'd never experienced before. Our family dinners now include both my mother's pot roast and Sarah's grandmother's brisket, and somehow that combination feels perfect. The children, Emma and her 2-year-old brother David, are growing up knowing they're loved unconditionally, knowing they're part of something bigger than themselves. They have rooms at both their parents' house and mine, and they move between them as naturally as if the whole city is their playground. Last week, Emma helped me plant new roses in the garden. As we were working, she asked me why the flowers were so important to me. "These roses were planted by your great-grandfather Robert," I explained. "Every time I see them bloom, I remember how much he loved me and how much he loved your daddy." "Will you plant roses for me someday?" she asked. "We just did," I told her, pointing to the small bush we just put in the ground. "This one is yours. And someday, when you're all grown up, you can tell your children about the day we planted it together." She beamed with pride, her little hands still dirty from the soil. "And I'll tell them about you, too, Grandma Ellie. About how you're the best grandma in the whole world." Moments like that make everything worth it. The pain Madison caused, the mistakes we all made, the long journey back to each other. Because that's what family really is. Not the easy times when everything goes smoothly, but the hard times when you have to fight for each other, when you have to make difficult choices to protect the people you love. I've learned that being a mother doesn't end when your children grow up and get married. It evolves, but it never ends. Sometimes being a good mother means letting go, and sometimes it means holding on. The trick is knowing which situation calls for which response. With Madison, I knew I had to hold on, not to control Michael's life, but to protect him from someone who was using him. I had to be the bad guy for a while, the interfering mother-in-law, the obstacle to his happiness. I had to let him think I was wrong, let him choose her over me, because I knew that eventually the truth would come out. And when it did, I wanted to be there to help him pick up the pieces. The hardest part wasn't Madison's cruelty toward me. I've dealt with difficult people in business for decades. The hardest part was watching my son become someone I didn't recognize, seeing him lose confidence in his own judgment, watching him become dependent on someone who didn't have his best interests at heart. But we got through it. Our family not only survived, but became stronger. Michael is more decisive now, more confident in his instincts. He values family in a way he never did before Madison showed him what it felt like to lose it. And Sarah has shown us all what it looks like when someone truly wants to be part of a family, not just benefit from it. I think about Robert often, especially during family gatherings. I wonder what he would think of how everything turned out. I think he'd be proud of Michael for finding his way back to his values. I think he'd love Sarah and the grandchildren. And I think he'd understand why I did what I did to protect our family. Sometimes I catch Michael looking at me during dinner, and I can see the gratitude in his eyes. Not gratitude for the money or the business success, but gratitude for not giving up on him, for being there when he finally saw the truth about Madison. "Mom," he said to me recently, "I don't think I ever thanked you properly for seeing through Madison from the beginning." "You don't need to thank me," I told him. "That's what mothers do. We see the threats to our children's happiness, even when they can't see them themselves. But I made it so hard for you. I chose her over you so many times." "Michael, you didn't choose her over me. You chose what you thought was love. The fact that it wasn't real love isn't your fault. It's hers for pretending to be something she wasn't." We've had many conversations like that over the past few years, working through the guilt and pain of that period in our lives. But those conversations have brought us closer together, helped us understand each other better. I've also had long talks with Sarah about what happened with Madison. Sarah wanted to understand how someone could come into a loving family and try to destroy it from within. "I can't imagine wanting to cut Michael off from the people who love him," she told me once. "When I married him, I felt like I was gaining a whole new family, not losing anything." That's the difference between someone who comes from love and someone who comes from need, I explained. "You came into this family because you loved Michael and wanted to share your life with him. Madison came into this family because she saw an opportunity to improve her circumstances. How did you know, though? How did you see it so clearly when Michael couldn't?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I think it's because I've been building and protecting this family for over 40 years. I know what it feels like when someone genuinely wants to contribute to it versus when someone wants to take from it. Madison never asked about family traditions. She wanted to create new ones that excluded the past. She never showed interest in Robert's memory or our history. She wanted to start fresh because the past didn't serve her purposes. But you with me, you asked me to tell you stories about Michael as a child. You wanted to learn Robert's favorite recipes. You asked about our family traditions because you wanted to honor them, not replace them. You saw our history as something to build on, not something to overcome. That's really what it comes down to, the difference between addition and subtraction. Sarah added to our family. Madison tried to subtract from it until only the parts that benefited her remained. As I near the end of my story, I want you to understand something important. This isn't really a story about an evil daughter-in-law or a meddling mother-in-law. This is a story about the difference between real love and counterfeit love, between people who build families and people who exploit them. Every family faces these challenges in some form. Maybe it's not a gold-digging spouse. Maybe it's a friend who's using you, a business partner who's stealing from you, or a family member who's taking advantage of your generosity. The specifics don't matter. What matters is learning to recognize the difference between people who want to share your journey and people who want to hijack your destination. I'm 72 years old now, and I've seen a lot of life. I've built a business, raised a son, buried a husband, and helped raise grandchildren. Through it all, the most important lesson I've learned is this: protect the people you love, even when it's difficult, even when they don't understand, even when it makes you the villain in their story for a while. Real love isn't always easy or comfortable. Sometimes real love means making hard choices, setting difficult boundaries, and standing up to people who are hurting your family. Sometimes real love means being patient while the people you care about figure out the truth for themselves. But here's the beautiful thing about real love: it endures. It survives manipulation, deception, and even temporary rejection. It waits patiently in the wings until it's needed again. And then it's there, strong as ever, ready to help heal the wounds and rebuild what was damaged. Today, as I watch my granddaughter play in the same garden where her great-grandfather proposed to me, where her father learned to walk, where she'll probably bring her own children someday, I'm filled with gratitude. Not just for the good times, but for all of it. Even Madison, in her own twisted way, helped teach us what we really value. Our family is stronger now because it was tested. Michael is a better husband to Sarah because he learned what a bad marriage looks like. I'm a better mother because I learned when to hold on and when to let go. And Sarah and the children get to benefit from all the lessons we learned the hard way. The trust fund is gone now. Michael owns everything outright, as he should. But the real trust, the trust between family members who've been through fire together and come out stronger, that's something no legal document could ever capture. That's the legacy Robert and I really built. Not the money or the business success, but a family that knows how to love each other through anything. A family that recognizes the difference between people who want to join us and people who want to use us. A family that protects its own, no matter the cost. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth fighting for.